Thank you. Appreciate you all kind of having me today. I feel like a bit of an imposter with this group, so thank you. I am going to try and use your lesson that you heard the first day, but I'm going to try and tell you a few things today. The first is I think you're all awesome. The second is that I think Canada needs you. And the last is I've been on the other side of the table with a number of my clients where we go through actually full days where they're getting presented to all day by different startup founders. And I have a few lessons that I've taken away from those interactions. So appreciate the time, and I'll jump right in. So first, I am really impressed with all of you. I had a startup prior to my MBA, which failed miserably. And I learned a lot from it. It was very helpful to me, but I don't think I have either the self-confidence or the risk tolerance to be a startup founder. So I'm deeply impressed with all of you. The second is Canada actually needs you. So we do a lot of research within McKinsey on different countries and on a lot of economic factors, especially. And Canada has a massive productivity gap, and we are terrible at scaling innovation for sure. So I think we need more rooms like this. We need more people thinking about how founders can be successful in this country. And I really, really do believe that we need this for our country to be successful. So I guess from me, thank you. Lastly, and what I hope is a little bit helpful to all of you, is I have done a couple of sessions where we take and you know, as I'm saying it, I'm realizing that, you know, there's probably another thing we can do in Canada where we take executive teams from some of the larger companies in Canada to go see ecosystems, right? So we will go, obviously, for a lot of digital stuff to Silicon Valley. We've gone for cyber things to Israel. We've gone, right, there's teams to really experience what's going on in that ecosystem. My kind of takeaways from doing that and then debriefing with those clients are that, first of all, any idea you have is probably not that original, and there's someone else working on it. In many cases, several others working on it. Hopefully that's, you know, not a shock to many of you. You're probably used to this, but there are just a lot of people working on it. And I think, you know, my realization from sitting in a bunch of those is that the difference isn't really the idea. When you are on the other side of the table and when they're debriefing, thinking about it, they are looking at who really gets them and who understands them. When you go for a good presentation followed by a bad or the other way around, the difference is the poor presentation, they are talking about themselves. They're talking about this amazing technology. They're talking about how they can detect things never detected before, right? And you could, like with fraud, there were a few that people could, like, you know, through mouse movements, they could really like generate a pattern of, is it an individual or not? And like super cool stuff. And those presentations tended to be really cool, and no one would talk about them after. And the ones that did really well are the ones who said, listen, I've analyzed your financial statement and you have 500 million in fraud. We think that, you know, about 40% of that is, you know, third parties impersonating your customers. And our solution, we think, tackles about 60% of it. And they would leave the room thinking, oh my God, like that is a, you know, at least a $50 million opportunity for us. And they get us. They understand what we're trying to do. And they didn't just come up with the technology. They came up with an answer to our problem, not a cool technology that is an answer to how do I use ChatGPT, right? It is very focused on them. And so, like, big companies are not everything. I get that. And I know that big companies, even if you kind of sell a big contract in, can also bankrupt a startup because they're dysfunctional in a myriad of ways. But when you find the right one, and when you have someone who really believes in you and can kind of usher you through the internal processes, I think they can be amazing. And I guess the, you know, what I would leave you with is try and really think about it from their perspective, and really show in that meeting that you have, if you have 10 minutes with them, show them that you get them and you get their problem. So hope that's helpful.
So the first question I have is, so you can talk about the company, but I think you're also selling to an individual. So how important is it to show that you understand the individual, and what can you make that individual excited about to be your champion? Because one thing to say, hey, we've got this problem for this company, this is a big opportunity, but it's another thing to get that individual excited to take that risk. So what tips do you have on that perspective?
Yeah. So I'll give two, and they'll be kind of very different. The first is if you don't have any intelligence beforehand, don't try and figure it out in the meeting. Just if you don't know who the people are and you don't really know what their problems are, play it straight down the middle, because you just don't know, and I think there's more likelihood that you get it wrong than get it right. I would say when this is won and lost is before the meeting. So all of you will have other people in this room who probably know people in different LinkedIn, or find out who your investors know in that specific organization. I think there's a bunch of different ways to figure out who is in the room and what they care about. Or listen to quarterly earnings reports where people talk about these things. There's a bunch of ways of doing it in advance. If you don't know in advance, then don't try and figure it out in the meeting itself.
First of all, thank you so much for a great presentation. I think it was amazing. The question that I have, let's say I'm preparing for the meeting with the company that I want to sell my product to, but I don't know yet which out of so many problems that they have my product that can solve will solve for them. How to find that specific problem to which I have to double down on the meeting, and how to do that research up in front. So what should I do?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for the kind words as well. But again, I think there are a bunch of ways you can tackle this. Companies actually do talk about a lot of this stuff in earnings reports, so it is actually a good tool. The other thing I would always say is find someone who's worked in that industry, find someone who's worked in that company, talk to them about it. These things usually are not state secrets. When companies are facing these challenges, everyone knows it. And most companies, especially if you look at the big industries in Canada, the financial services, whether it be banks or insurance, telcos, etc., most of them are facing the same challenges. So if you can probably get pretty good intelligence from someone who's worked in that industry for a while.
The question's been answered. That's how good you are, Erez.
Jay, you're rolling past someone who had one.
Hi, Erez. Thanks. Great presentation. Thank you so much. My question is regards to what you said in the beginning regarding, where Canada is with regards to innovation, and how much we need to work on that. Why do you think that's the case? If you were to compare it to other countries, I know, and taking the population element out of the picture, let's or access to certain resources are a little bit siloed here relative to some other places. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel like Alex has thought about this more than I have because he's smiling in the front row. I think that might be part of it. Information and siloed resources. I think Canadians, there is something about the Canadian mentality of people being slightly more conservative, and if you, especially most people compare us to the US because they're our neighbors to the south, and they tend to be slightly more boastful and aggressive in their communication style, which I think in some of these cases works well. So I think we need to know that about ourselves. I also, just from a structural perspective, we don't have a lot of capital that people, if you look at most VCs, and probably others in the room have a better sense, most Canadian companies that are scaling with money from US VCs. And we just don't have enough of that infrastructure. And people might say, well, we don't have that infrastructure because we don't have, chicken and egg kind of problem. But the reality is we don't have the infrastructure to truly scale. And we have a lot of our best talent, getting drained to the US.
On that happy note, we'll take one last question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So on that note, I remember Fatima mentioning like global talent and the opportunity for that. There's also the opportunity for using the other countries around the world in order to complete certain parts. So some of you guys are going through R&D, some of you guys in the medtech space maybe going through clinical trials. Have you seen that risk tolerant enough to be able to do that? Because we have certain processes that are very specific. Is there like the ability to transfer that and the information and let's say the approvals for certain products?
Yeah. So, I mean, relatively specifically, I don't think the work needs to happen in the location where the governance is happening, right? So I think that is that we need to take advantage of. Like we have, Jeffrey Hinton for like 2 decades, people thought he was like totally nuts. And then like compute caught up and now he's like the founder of AI. And a lot of like the talent from his lab, I mean, the largest scale up like AI incubator is here in Toronto, right? We have a ton of the raw kind of components that we need for like a next wave of startups that I think hopefully will scale and will scale here. And like just as a couple of examples, like Google, Facebook, all of them have their AI development centers here within 100 kilometers of Toronto. And like within McKinsey, we also started like we have a capabilities network that we opened here. And frankly, the reason we pushed so hard to open it is because we pay way less for talent here compared to New York, Boston, San Francisco, and we find the talents better. So I do think there's a lot we can do.
Well, Erez, thank you so much. Can we get a round of applause?